about NIFs, MIFs, vital capacities, any of that stuff, so we make sure our patient is ready to be weaned. So, let's see. How about Jay? Hi, Jay. You again. It's going to be anybody. What's the number one most important thing that we must look at before we can see if our patient's ready to wean? Before we get to that, we're not worried about a trial yet. It was one of the questions in the homework. I didn't ask you, Jeremy. What's the first thing we need to know if we're going to wean somebody from the vent?
Leave on their own.
Before that. Well, do you know?
Is the patient's condition improving?
Is the underlying problem resolved?
Oh,
Yes.
Wow.
You were right. And that's a common thing people do, you guys, is they jump ahead. We need to know if our patient is ready to be weaned before we think about weaning them. So we're going to look at the criteria we look at first. Is the underlying problem resolved? So Jay, I could take one of your answers here as a second one is the patient hemodynamically stable? And we look at all these things together. There's no particular order except for number one. If your patient's underlying problem that put them on the vent is not fixed, we don't need to worry about taking them off yet. Off vasopressors. We wrote down those names before, right? So go back and look if you don't remember. You need to know the names of the vasopressors because they need to be off of them if we're going to wean. Because if not, they're not stable enough. Rose, do you know another one?
Doctor's order.
No, this is actually kind of stuff that's kind of like in a protocol. We do it all together. We're not even ready to start weaning yet. We're looking at what would be some things that'd be important. It was in the homework.
If they're starting to spontaneously breathe on
Yes.
their own.
Can they take a spontaneous breath? Daniel, you know another one?
How their SpO2 is looking?
Okay, do you remember what the criteria was?
It has to be higher than 90%.
Okay, so SpO2 greater than 90. And where would we want our PaO2 to be?
Greater than 60.
Yep. Let's see if we can get the other two parts. What do we want our FiO2 to be at?
FiO2 less than 40%? Or 60%?
It's 40 to 50. You're going to see probably, so I'm just going to say less than 50. And P? $1 million?
The P, less than 10? 5? Around 5?
Less than 10 is fine. Good job. I'll give you guys a minute to write that one down. So our standard criteria, SpO2 greater than or equal, I should say greater or equal, PaO2 greater or equal to 60 on low FiO2s, low peaks is basically what we're talking about. So if your patient is on 100%, they're not weaning today. If they're on 100%, is the underlying problem resolved? No. So it doesn't matter if they can take a spontaneous breath. So you can look at simple things. If your patient's still on dopamine, That's a vasopressor. Nope, not coming off today. If they're on 15 a peak, nope, not coming off today. So, but we look at this stuff basically every morning. Yes.
Wasn't there something about they have to take continuous breath for like 30 minutes or a certain time?
We'll get to that when we get to the SPT. That's the next step. This is just now, right now, I just want to know, can they breathe on their own? All right, Matt, can you give me another one?
Anything to do with ABGs?
Yes.
Okay. So.
What part of the ABG?
pH. CO2 we already have, so CO2. pH,
Not.
pH for sure.
Okay, where should the pH be? What's kind of our standard marker for pH?
Within normal.
0.35, 0.45.
No, that's the normal. What's kind of the pH range that we kind of use? It's kind of a cutoff that we say.
Like 0.2.
7.2. So we want our pH to be greater than 7.2. We've got CO2 is going to vary, you guys. So I don't really like to put that on here because if your patient is a chronic retainer, their CO2 is going to be high. So if your patient is stable from a respiratory standpoint, your pH will be normal. If this, we're especially looking about for like a metabolic problem. So if your pH is 7.15 for a metabolic reason, we're not taking them off the vent, even if all my respiratory stuff is good. Too many other things are going on. So you'll see that maybe in renal failure and sepsis, things like that. And they wouldn't meet other criteria anyways. Okay, we're getting down to the nitty gritty here. Alicia.
Your patients work up breathing? Because if they've been ventilated for a while and then their respiratory muscles are weak, they may have an increased work of breathing.
Yeah, but we would look at that more when we go on to the SPT, not yet here. If everything else meets criteria, we're still gonna try to put them on a spontaneous breathing trial.
Their level of consciousness?
Yes, level of consciousness. So I'm gonna use Glasgow Coma Scale for that. GCS greater than 8, no altered level of consciousness in a perfect world. So we've got 2 more. Dave.
Afebrile?
Yes, afebrile. And I can't believe no one's got this last one yet.
It's probably too simple.
Yes, it has enough to do with that Ramsey agitation sedation scale. Patient has to be on a sedation vacation. Sharon, can you know it's not my, explain the RAS, because I know you're better at that than me.
RAS stands for Richmond Agitation Sedation Scale. And so what they're gonna do is they're gonna actually pause the patient's sedation. If it's somebody that's had a big surgery, let's say like a big belly surgery, they are allowed to still have some pain medication on board, because that can obviously cause them to fail, but we want them to be sedated minimally. And what we do is we come up with a range when we evaluate them. The goal is for them to be between what we call -2 and 0. 0 would be the patient is lying in bed, they're able to understand what you're asking them to do, they're not fighting or thrashing around in the bed. -2 would be if you went in and I went up to Ruthie and I said, Ruthie, and she kind of flitted her eyes open and fell back asleep because she's at least awake for about 10 seconds and then drifts back off. A -1 is that she's able to hold her eyes open a little bit longer, but still a little bit drowsy. Those are patients that you can continue to do the weaning process because we don't want them to be what we would call a +1 or a +2. A +1 is somebody who's gonna be rolling around in the bed. A +2 is somebody who's gonna be trying to climb out of the bed or fighting against the ventilator. You're gonna try to be doing a weaning with them and they're immediately gonna start breathing in the high 30s because they're maybe confused, combative, they still need that sedation on board to keep them calm enough to understand what you're trying to do. There's also a CPOT, which is, I always have to look that one up, but that's another one where we're kind of assessing their pain because pain can be a big issue. If somebody has pain, they're not gonna follow commands, be successful at weaning. So although it doesn't really, let's see, CPOT, which is a CPOT, we want that score to be in a range of 0 to 8, and it stands for Critical Care Pain Observation Tool. And that's where they kind of look at what is the patient's face doing? Are they grimacing? What's their body doing? Are they tense in the bed? We're also looking at how compliant are they with the ventilator? Are they fighting against the ventilator? Are they just kind of, we'll say, chilling in the bed? So CPOT is another score that you might see the nurses have to do a CPOT score. As an RT, you'll be paying attention really to the RAS score.
Yeah. So you guys, you have that on the paper, don't you, Sharon?
I do, yeah.
So we'll make a copy of the RAS for you. That's the one we more commonly see. And you don't necessarily need to be able to recite off the top of your head every criteria in there, but you do need to know that 0 to -2 is where we want them to be, because that means they're going to be able to awake enough to follow commands and things like that. So if it's positive, then that's bad, and it would be a reason to not come off the vent. So to make sure everyone understands, this criteria has to be looked at. So this is a screening stage. Is my patient ready to try to wean? We're not even there yet. So that's why I said we're not worried about NIFs or any of that stuff. If you can pass all this, then yes, we're gonna go to the next stage. Yes?
There's something about the
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about that when I go to the SPT. So if we pass all this, and we'll talk about the marginal patient in just a little bit. So let's say